I remember hearing people lay out contrasting beliefs about God. Some would say, God's not a God of judgment, but of love. He loves everyone just like they are. And then on the opposite side, some would say, well, I just can't accept God who's so harsh and has harsh judgment. So which is it? Is it a God of judgment or a God of loving mercy? That's an interesting question, and it's one that I want to explore today on Truth Matters.
Today, truth is denied, ignored, and resisted with open hostility. Yet in life and in times of crisis, we discover that truth matters.
Now, you might be wondering about the question in the introduction, especially in the light of our current study in Jude on false teaching. Now, if you've been listening to this study, you might rightfully and definitely get the impression that God is not pleased with false teachers. In Jude, God is addressing false teachers who infiltrate into his people in the congregation with the purpose of self-rewarding self-deception. God is not shy about declaring his displeasure and the awaiting judgment for such false teachers. Last week we saw how Jude encourages believers to remain in the love of God by being built up in the faith, praying according to the will of God, and living with the anticipation of the Lord's return. Remaining in the love of God is the clear result of loving obedience to God's will that is clearly developed and declared in the Word of God. But how does this question I asked in the introduction fit into the context of this? The answer to that question is found in the next two verses. And those two verses are the focus of today's episode. So let's look at them. Verse 22 and 23 says, "And have mercy on some who are doubting, save others, snatching them out of the fire, and on some have mercy with fear, hating even the garment polluted by the flesh." Now, a couple of questions need to be answered here. Who is Jude talking to, and what is Jude talking about? Well, the context provides us the answer. Remember in verse 20, Jude told us who he was addressing when he said, "But you, beloved." From those words in verse 20 until the end of this short letter, Jude is talking directly to believers. In fact, the whole letter is addressed to believers, actually. As it said in verse 1, "To those who are the called, beloved in God the Father, and kept for Jesus Christ." And for most of the letter, Jude has been speaking about false teachers who have crept in among that congregation. But as we saw last week, Jude is closing up this letter and he's shifting his emphasis with specific instruction. Last week we saw that he is telling the faithful how to stay connected to the Lord while dealing with false teachers. But in the verses today, still talking to believers, he's addressing how to respond to those who are involved in false teaching. Now, even though today we're looking at two verses, like last week, this is actually just one sentence. It is a complete thought talking about a single issue. And that issue is God's instructions to us on how to respond to those who are involved in false teaching. What we're going to see is that there are three commands given to us in these two verses. These three commands will address how we respond to three similar but different groups of people who are involved in false teaching. Let me explain. When you have a movement or a false teaching, there are leaders and there are followers. That's not hard to understand. And each of them have invested themselves in the false teaching to some degree. But their connection to the false teaching is not the same. Like any set of ideas, there are levels of connection and faithfulness to a cause or a set of ideas. The deeper the commitment, the more invested they are in that cause or set of ideas. Now, when believers encounter someone involved in a false teaching, the question then arises, well, how are we to respond to them? Well, Jude said earlier that we're to contend for the faith. But what does that look like? Well, some people I've seen translate earnestly contend to mean to be contentious. They use this as an opportunity to get into a fight or a battle with those who are in false teaching. And some contend for the faith by responding in judgment and condemnation. Now, Jude does speak about judgment, and so some choose to use this way of contending for the faith. Now, we're in a battle, no doubt. But how do we do this battle? Is it like the battle that mankind does in the world? But I don't want to stray too far. My point is, how are we to live and to react? And the point is, how we do this, how we react, is dramatically different from how the world reacts with those who they have a disagreement with. And this will become clear when we look at the text in Jude. And as to judgment, we need to be clear. Judgment belongs to God. With the help of God and His Word, we have the ability to know the truth, and so we make that kind of judgment. But the final judgment of individuals, well, that's God's alone. Now, before I dive into the text, I want to emphasize that there is a marked difference of how we are called to respond to the world and its lies in comparison how the world naturally responds to those with whom they have disagreement with. For instance, listen to what Jesus said in Matthew 5:43 and 44. You've heard that it is said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Wow, that is so not like how the world responds. Now, some might say, well, that's just sweet, loving Jesus. That's the New Testament expression. Really? What about what's written in Proverbs 25:21 and 22? It says, if your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. And if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. You see, whereas final judgment belongs to God, for our part, our response to our fellow man draws from a different standard than our natural inclinations. You see, as children of God, when we see what God gives us in His commands, the standard for those commands, well, it's God Himself, His character. He commands us to be givers. Why? Because He's a giver. We're commanded to be merciful. Why? That's because God is merciful. And we're commanded to love because He is love. As I've said of all of this, and this is the context for what we'll see today. Now, like I mentioned in today's text, we are given 3 commands on how we're to respond to those who are involved in false teaching. And these 3 commands point to 3 degrees in which people are connected or involved in false teaching. First of all, comes the command in verse 22. It says, "And have mercy on some who are doubting." Let's call this group the doubting. When false teaching is presented, one response can be that of confusion. A person hears a false teaching and it causes them to doubt. The word in the original language points to someone who begins to withdraw or hesitate. See, false teaching begins to create in some people an uncertainty about the truth. They're not well-founded, and so this confusion happens. And what we've heard and what they've heard from false teachers have caused them to doubt. This is not an uncommon reaction in the presence of deceptive teaching. 1 Corinthians 11:3 says, "But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your minds will be led astray from the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ." So, how are we to respond to an individual who finds himself in this condition? Jude says it. Have mercy on them. Show them mercy. This is not a word of judgment. It is a command of compassionate mercy. Paul reminds us of this in Romans 15:1 and 2. Now we who are strong ought to bear the weakness of those without strength and not just please ourselves. Each of us is to please his neighbor for his good, to his edification. We've all had times in our walk when we are thankful for someone who came along and mercifully helped us. They didn't beat us up, but they did aid us with the mercy of God to see the truth. We should likewise do the same. As Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Now we come to this second level of individual who have been affected or involved in false teaching. Jude in verse 23a says, save others, snatching them out of the faith. This is a different group. Let's call them the involved. Where the first group had allowed the false teaching to create doubt and withdrawal from the truth, this next group, well, they have made it to a different level of commitment to the false teaching. They are in danger. The challenge in responding to this group has increased the stakes and response from us as a believer. They need rescuing. They have come to believe the lies, and unless something changes, these lies will put them face to face with God in His judgment. And while God desires to grant mercy and salvation, rejecting the truth of God only ends in judgment. And here's the dilemma that judgment and mercy, in the judgment and mercy of God. How are they reconciled? Well, they're reconciled in only one place, the cross of Jesus Christ. It is on the cross where Jesus took and received the judgment of sin, which then provided access to grace and mercy. God displayed His mercy through the judgment which He put upon Christ Himself, and then it is then received on those who would trust and believe in what Christ alone has done. God alone remains the only source of salvation. Therefore, when facing an individual who is involved and convinced of false teaching, they need salvation. They need to be rescued, delivered, saved from that false teaching. Listen to James 15:19 and 20. My brethren, if any among you strays from the truth, the one who turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his ways will save his soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. Jude vividly makes the point clear. The command to us is to save those in this group, and this saving is described as snatching them out of the fire. The word translated snatching is a very strong image of seizing someone or taking them by force. The reason for this forceful image is because they are in danger of fiery judgment. We often see individuals who are sincere in their beliefs, and maybe they're basically good, and we forget. We forget that outside of Christ, there is no salvation. And what awaits them is judgment for sin, an eternal fiery judgment. We need to present the gospel of Christ to them. Extending the mercy of God to them comes in the form of presenting the truth of salvation through no one else but Jesus Christ. The lies they follow may be sincere, but it will not save them. We must keep this in mind, in the forefront of our mind. Jesus came into the world to save sinners, and He has made us instruments to proclaim that message. And sharing that gospel is an expression of God's mercy through us. This then brings us to the last group that Jude points to. In verse 23b it says, and on some have mercy with fear, hating even the garment polluted by the flesh. Let's call this group the fully committed. As one commentary put it, sometimes Christians may have opportunity to reach out to the most committed apostates. Such heretics are profoundly deceived individuals who are deeply committed to their own deceptions. In some cases, they are even the articulators of the heretical doctrine and the leaders within themselves within a false teaching system. The approach when dealing with this group calls for very special instructions in our response. First of all, Jude says that the mercy that we extend to them requires an acknowledged fear. Think of it as a respectable caution. Our approach with this individual is not to be taken lightly. We must be cautious, sober-minded, and clear-headed. The level of deception exemplified here carries with it the aspects of corruption and deception that should not be treated lightly. Evil does not always put itself in some horrible regalia. Its disguise can come in the form of deceptive light. It can be seductive, corrupting. Its lies are subtle. The believer who approaches a person in this category should not be a novice or enter such an encounter unaware of the dangers involved. Jude uses very strong language to make this point. The believer should not have any attraction to what this committed person is involved with. And he says it this way, hating even the garment polluted by the flesh. Now recall some of the areas in which false teaching takes people. This involves enticements of the flesh. It involves personal monetary enrichments. It involves so-called personal enlightenment and autonomy. And any and everything the enemy uses to capture people away from the truth are the things which a believer might face when reaching out to the fully committed. The believer who seeks to encounter an entrenched apostate must not have any attraction to such things. Instead, they should detest them as if they were filthy garments. The word here is exactly the description that someone would use to describe a person's undergarments, which are stained by the waste from the body. They are soiled and spoiled and polluted. They're not to be touched. The believer who is led to this kind of encounter should be cautious and aware of polluting dangers. I would suggest that the only way this kind of encounter can be carried out is with the eyes of Christ, His mercy, and a heart and mind strengthened by a holy life. We are living in evil days. Oh, there should be no doubt about that. The enemy is present and he is deceiving many. The lies of the enemy creates doubt that distance people from the truth of God. To them, we are to extend the mercy of God that they might know the truth, tell them the truth. Some have begun to believe the lies and they are in danger. We must proclaim the mercy of God found in the gospel. They will not know the truth unless someone tells them. And there are some who are fully committed and invested in the lies of the enemy. And we are to approach them with caution and preparedness. They can be rescued, but only by the power of God, which God provides in giving them sight where there is blindness. Judgment belongs to the Lord. That is His to dispense and execute. We are to be vessels of God's mercy. We are to dispense mercy, bear witness to the truth, and grow in the knowledge of the truth so that we can labor and strive for our Lord and His truth. Tell them about Jesus. For there is no other name by which man can be saved. That's the truth. And that truth matters. Thanks for watching and listening to Truth Matters. Please like, share, and subscribe to Truth Matters. It truly helps to spread and keep us going. We'll catch you next time.